If you've been listening to this podcast since the beginning, you heard how my brother Drew and I, along with our friends Rosie and Jane, spent many months planning for our big adventure. We launched a fundraising campaign, figured out our route, took a first aid course, and got our vaccinations and visas. Then we bought a car, learned to drive stick, figured out basic car maintenance, and got used to riding on the left side of the road. The trip itself was pretty epic, spanning 18 countries and 8 time zones. We visited many places that most Westerners never even dream of going, and we racked up memories we'll hold on to for the rest of our lives. But then, after 7 weeks, we reached the finish line, and everything was suddenly over. There was no more waking up early to hit the road, driving 12 hours to make up for lost time, and arriving at our destination long after dark. No more tow trucks or tow ropes, restaurants serving meat from another strange animal, or sleeping in uncomfortable beds in sketchy hotel rooms that desperately needed a remodel. No more use for Google Translate, or need to hand over bottles of vodka to police officers as bribes. And you know what? As crazy as it sounds, we kind of missed it. I asked around, and it turned out we weren't the only ones who felt that way. Travel blogger Sherry Ott told me she remembered what it was like after she completed the rally back in 2011.
The planning process of this starts so early on, a year ahead of time, and you throw all this time and effort into it, and when that's done, it's like Christmas Day once all the presents are open, right? That spark of anticipation is gone, and in some ways it's kind of sad. I went back to more travel, but it's still not the same rush that I got when I was in the middle of the rally, which is why I went and did more things like that, because it kind of becomes this addiction.
Rally organizer Jules Ingram also knows the feeling.
We've often joked about setting up a support group. There's little things like Mongol Rally veterans will never complain about anywhere being a long drive ever again, and never complain about roads being bad. And often, in fact, will go out their way to try and find the worst roads possible to kind of rekindle a bit of that magic. Planning what you're going to do next is the only way around it, I think. And you do reassess the way you look at travelling, I guess. You know, package holidays don't really cut the mustard.
I'm Scott Gurian, and if you don't know who I am by now, where have you been? Seriously, I'm thrilled to have you, but if you're just joining me, please do yourself a favor and go back and listen from the beginning of this series, or today's show probably won't make much sense. The rest of you know that over the past 24 or so episodes, I've traced the ups and downs of our journey, from the many hardships we faced.
I suppose there's worse places to break down.
There's not that many I can think of.
To our incredible comebacks.
Yesterday, I did not think that we would be standing here today.
And the amazing people we met along the way.
I cannot believe how kind and how generous you have been.
At the urging of friends, I had my microphone with me to capture every step of our journey.
Like, seriously, you better be, recording the whole damn thing.
And on this final episode of Season 1, I'm going to be looking back at our entire trip, sharing some interesting tidbits I didn't have space to include in previous shows, as well as some updates. You'll also hear from a few other rally participants, and we'll talk about what it was like finishing this adventure and returning to normal, everyday life. So welcome, and please stick around.
This is so much fun.
Let's start where I left off last time, at the rally finish line in Ulan-Ude, Russia. After hearing about all the challenges we faced on our journey, a few of you asked me how the other teams fared, so I checked with rally organizer Jules Ingram, and here are the final numbers he sent me. Out of the more than 400 teams who first registered for the Mongol Rally in 2016, the year we took this trip, 129 changed their minds or got cold feet and quit before even starting. Of those remaining, another 23 had second thoughts and decided to drop out at some point in their journey, turn around, and drive home. Then there were about 60 teams who broke down and were never able to make it all the way. In the end, my brother Drew and I, along with our friends Rosie and Jane, Team Don't Understand and Team Sugar and Spice, were among just 191 teams that crossed the finish line, which was less than half the number that originally signed up, so I think that's quite an accomplishment. Before I go on, there are a few other miscellaneous updates I wanted to share from previous episodes. First of all, you'll remember that one of the few rules of the Mongol Rally was that all teams had to raise money for charity, and I'm thrilled to report back that many of you chipped in and helped us exceed our goal. We raised a total of nearly $3,600, which we split between Cool Earth, which works to prevent rainforest destruction, and Soil, that organization that builds compostable toilets in Haiti that I told you about near the beginning of this series. So thanks to all of you for your generosity. Incidentally, one of you messaged me to say you thought it seemed ironic that we burned all that gas driving 11,000 miles to raise money to protect the environment, and I agree, that's a totally valid criticism. So for what it's worth, I also used a small portion of the donations we received to purchase carbon credits to offset whatever damage our Nissan Micra may have caused. At the end of the episode where I described our dramatic rescue by Mongolia's National Emergency Management Agency, I mentioned that we later got invited to the U.S. Embassy because the folks there were really curious to hear the full story of what had happened. Unfortunately, for security reasons, we had to leave all cell phones and electronic gear in lockers near the front entrance, so I wasn't able to record the conversation we had with the chief consular officer, but there were a few interesting things I learned that I thought might interest all of you. First of all, I found out that we shouldn't have been worried about them sending a helicopter to search for us, because it turns out there's no emergency air support in the entire country of Mongolia. And Rosie and Jane's hunch that the Americans were the best ones to contact ended up being correct, because we discovered they had 50 or 60 people working in their embassy and therefore had the most resources. The British government, on the other hand, only had 4 people on the ground in Mongolia, and the Aussies had even less. Which leads me to the next thing I wanted to say, which is that before I took this trip, I think I was like most travelers, in that I was aware my country had an embassy in most countries of the world, but I kind of took it for granted and never really gave it much thought. Now that I've been in this situation where I've had to reach out for help, both in Mongolia and also earlier in our trip when we were in Turkmenistan and the soldiers wouldn't let us out of the country, I have this newfound appreciation for just how valuable of a resource embassy and consulate staff can be when you really need them. So when I read all these news stories about the U.S. State Department basically being gutted under the Trump administration, it really frustrates and worries me, because we could have been in a whole lot more trouble if those people hadn't been there to help. Next time you meet a consulate officer, please thank them for their work, because they're unsung heroes in my eyes, and I don't think they receive anywhere near as much appreciation as they deserve. Finally, an update about Big Red, the car my brother and I drove, with which we had a love-hate relationship. After dropping it off at the rail yard in Ulan-Ude, Russia, it was loaded onto a freight train with hundreds of other rally cars and sent back to Estonia, where it was then sent to an auto recycler. A few months after I returned home, they mailed me the license plate along with an official letter confirming that the car, which they simply referred to as the material, had been destroyed by hydraulic excavator. Although we knew all along that that was going to happen, it was still really sad to read what was essentially a certificate of death, because now things were totally final. I mentioned a few minutes ago how proud we were to complete this adventure, given that so many others didn't. But, of course, we weren't the only ones who persevered in the face of enormous adversity. And if you thought our journey was interesting, remember that these other teams each went their own path and had their own backstories. So, on today's episode, I wanted to share my conversations with some of them. First up is Aaron Heather, who was taking part in the rally with his wife Jo and their daughter Kate. They called their team the Truants, and I caught up with them near the end of their trip in Mongolia.
So we're from New Zealand, or born and bred in New Zealand, but we've actually been living in the Middle East for the last 10 years. So this is our opportunity to come and do something different, and then we've actually taken a year off. So once we finish this, we keep travelling.
Wow.
So yeah, a bit spoiled.
Where have you been living?
Last 4 years we've been in Muscat in Oman, and before that in Dubai.
And why are you called the Truants?
Because she's out of school for a year.
How old is she?
11.
You're 11, so you're taking a year off from school to travel around on this world adventure? Wow.
We're bums now, so we have no house, we have no residency, we're just gypsies, aren't we? Yeah.
So you're driving from London to Mongolia or to Ulan-Ude, Russia, and then where do you go?
Then we take a train to China. We've got a month in China, so we're backpacking from there on. So after China, then we'll go 3 weeks in Nepal, then Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. Then we head back to New Zealand for Christmas, New Year's, and then South America for 4 months from bottom to top, and then we do Mexico and Cuba, go to San Francisco, pick up another car and drive to New York, and then we're done.
And then you go back to New Zealand, or do you know yet?
We fly back to London and we'll go and have a chat with my old employer and say, hey, we're back, help.
Will you employ me again?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
What do you do?
So I'm in construction on the legal money side of things. So I do all the contracts and litigation and horrible stuff like that.
So how did this start? You just told them, you said, I'm going to take a year off?
I've been telling them for 5 years and they go, no, you're not. So finally we said, yes, we are. Just because it suits Kate with her school, because she finishes primary school, has a year off and then goes to secondary school.
So what is it like having a whole family going on a trip like this?
We've been good so far. We've probably only had 2 big busts up. Arguments, and normally to do with stress. So when it goes wrong, of course there's yelling, but that happens in every team as well. We've got over it. Mm-hmm. So everyone chips in, we've all got our jobs. Like when we roll into a campsite, the tent goes up quick, the food gets cooked quick. So we're pretty good, we're pretty fine-tuned at the moment.
And what do you think it's like kind of sharing this experience with your family members? I
mean, let's be real. So Kate, my daughter, will be a teenager very shortly, won't want a bar of us. So this is a good time.
Well, she's still young.
Yeah.
And do you think these are good kind of formative experiences for her at this age?
Yeah, I do. She's been lucky. She's travelled a lot. She's seen a lot. But this is better for dragging her out of her shell.
She's very shy.
She is.
Yeah. Has it been hard for her being away from home, like away from her friends, and just with you two?
It has been surprisingly good, and she's been very good with emails to friends while we can. So it has been a lot smoother than we expected so far.
That was Aaron Heather from New Zealand, and I'll let this next team I spoke to introduce themselves.
So, my name's Matt.
I'm Zoe.
And we're from Devon, England, and our team is Team Honeymoon Road Trip, because it is our honeymoon.
And it's one hell of a road trip.
So when did you actually get married?
About 2 months before the rally. I changed my name, so I got a new passport, and we needed to have time for visas and planning and all that stuff.
So we had to do a lot of those visas really late, because obviously our passport wasn't valid.
Too late, as it turned out, because we couldn't get into Turkmenistan in the end. But yeah, the rest of it worked out.
And so what came first? I mean, had you planned to get married first, or you had planned this trip?
No, we planned to get married first. Well, we'd planned to get married and then go on a kind of extended honeymoon. And this trip fitted in the gap between getting married and our ultimate goal, which was to go back to New Zealand for a year or so.
This is, I guess, probably the most untraditional honeymoon that anyone could take, right?
Probably.
Yeah, we're not big beachy people generally, like lying on a beach style thing. So, it's not your average honeymoon.
I think that's fair. But yeah, we wouldn't, just as a normal holiday, we wouldn't just have a week on the beach somewhere. That's not really our sort of thing. So it wasn't really ever likely to happen for a honeymoon. I think this is probably a bit more out there than I would have expected. If you said 3 years ago, what are you going to do for your honeymoon? I probably wouldn't have thought we'd drive to Mongolia.
No. I'm not sure I would have either.
No. But it's worked out pretty well.
What did your friends and family say when you told them this is what you were planning to do on your honeymoon?
Oh, they thought we were absolutely off our rockers. Yeah, they thought it was just...
I think my parents are more used to these ideas than Zoe's parents.
Yeah, my parents took quite a bit of convincing. They were, quite worried about stuff that could happen and that could go wrong, and a lot of my friends were suddenly starting to Google, the political status of Azerbaijan or wherever, and getting a bit panicky.
So how has your honeymoon been?
Awesome.
I wouldn't change it.
No, definitely wouldn't change it in terms of doing the Mongol Rally. I think it's a pretty good start to married life, I would say.
I'd say so far so good, yeah.
So good. I think if we're lasting through this, I think that's probably a pretty good sign.
Yeah, I think so.
Though our individual stories from the Mongol Rally may have differed, There was still this special bond that all of us felt from having shared this experience, and while we sort of took it for granted while we were in the middle of everything, we began to really miss it once the trip ended and it was time to return home. You might remember Joe Rittenhouse, who I interviewed in my first episode from Turkmenistan. He's the one who found the supposed listening device in his hotel room's chandelier. I spoke with him a few months after the rally ended, and he told me how strange it had felt as his team slowly shrank.
It was really weird because, like, along the way, we had, like, slowly lost people in our group, and it was really, like, poetically tragic. Like, we lost 2 people in Kazakhstan, and then we had to leave one behind in Ulan-Ude so they could catch a flight, and then when we were driving back, we left one in Poland because he wanted to go off and do stuff, and then it was just me and my girlfriend, and we flew all the way, into Toronto, and then we flew back in the States into Philadelphia, and then, like, we said goodbye in Philadelphia. So, like, slowly but surely, everyone I had connections with on this rally disappeared. And then I was kind of waiting in the airport, and I was standing around, and I was just, like, looking at other people and things, and I was like, nobody knows what happened. My family came to pick me up, and it was genuine culture shock for, like, the first 72 hours I was home. It didn't really hit me until about a week later. I went to visit my girlfriend, and we saw each other, and we, like, exploded with, like, oh my gosh, someone else who knows. And I went to the gym in the area, and my friend who also did the rally with me had finally gotten back, and we didn't know we were going to see each other, and we talked for hours. There was, like, so much that I just couldn't explain to any of my friends, because no matter how much I was like, this is something amazing that happened, they just didn't understand in a lot of ways. It was something that only I had experienced in my little, monkey sphere of people. And it made it really, really hard to relate to people coming back initially.
Rosie remembered experiencing a similar sense of alienation when she got back to Australia.
It's actually felt a feeling of disconnection, having been in such an intense period of time, where your focus is so basic, so fundamental about, will we manage to get from A to B, or will the boys' car break down? When are we going to get something to eat? Do we have enough water with us? The very basic stuff. And then to suddenly have to sort of step back into your real world where other people just have not got a clue what you've done, where you've been. And I've struggled to have the words to explain it, to be honest. I mean, I went to a party shortly afterwards, and there were 2 or 3 people there who, friends, really good friends, who are themselves travellers. Maybe not so much now. They're sort of maybe 10, 15 years older than me, but have been, really adventurous travellers in the past. And they asked real questions. They were genuinely interested in the detail of it, and just kept firing questions at me the whole time. And, questions, the answers of which I had to really think about sometimes. But, most people, it's been kind of, oh, you've been on your trip. How was it? Oh, it was great. It was extraordinary and marvellous. Oh, lovely. And now you're back. And, it's kind of like, well, that kind of puts me into my place, doesn't it? I mean, am I the only one that's felt this way, or have you felt a bit of that as well?
I did actually know what she was talking about. It was hard to transition from being on the road and driving every day to sitting still in an environment that seemed remarkably mundane and normal. And it was hard to really describe that feeling to anyone else who hadn't experienced it for themselves. Even the little things, like driving my own car back home, seemed incredibly foreign. Like, it took me several weeks to get used to having the steering wheel on the left once again. And for the first few days, every time I turned the key in the ignition, my foot instinctively reached for the clutch, and my left hand reached to shift gears before I realized I didn't have to worry about any of that anymore. Joe Rittenhouse told me that the first few times he drove his own car after returning to Pennsylvania, he instinctively opened the passenger side door looking for the steering wheel, and he was amazed at how much more power his vehicle had. He said he tried going back to his old life, but it just wasn't the same.
I waited about 5 days to go back to work, and then the second I got back to work, I instantly started looking for a new job. Instantly. I helped manage and train people at a restaurant. And, like, I don't know if you've ever worked in the food industry, but a lot of the stuff is just so trivial. That's one of the things, the way the rally changed me, is I kind of, like, gave up on getting upset about things I can't control. When things just don't go my way, I just kind of go, whatever. I move on now, but like working in this place where people would get upset about everything under the sun, it really, really irked me. So I couldn't go back and do like old me in a way.
So what is the new you? How would you describe it?
I just want to do bigger things than like wake up every morning, collect a paycheck, and go back to sleep. Like I find that I care more about people. Like, I don't know if you had the same experience as me, but genuinely, I think the best part of the rally for me was people. The amount of like friendships that I made, people I ran into and saw and got to experience things with, and it made me much more open-minded about just how I interact with people. Like, there's just no reason to get into petty squabbles about silly things over like where you stand in line or this, that, or the other. Like, for me, there were days when we woke up in the rally and we were just like, where are we going to sleep tonight? Like, where are we going to get food? And it just put a lot of things into perspective for me. I've decided that I'm never going to do anything that I don't want to do, and everything that I am going to do is in direct relation to things I want to do later. I definitely want to see more of the world than I have before. What I've started doing now is when people ask me, like, how was the rally? I'm like, it was great. It was incredible. It was awesome for me. Do it yourself. Like, I would tell anyone to do the rally at this point. In fact, I might even do it again because it was pretty life-changing for me.
Joe wasn't the only one who told me the rally had changed him. I also heard that from Lyndon, that young guy from Australia who tagged along with us through Iran and helped us out when we overheated in the middle of the desert. You remember Lyndon.
What is that, a bike tube?
Yeah, exactly.
It's an inner tube, yeah. They're really good for concerts. Yeah, cut the valve out, tape one end to your willy, and you hang the bike tube down the inside of your pants.
What?
So when you're not having a piss, you fold it over and tuck it in your sock.
It's a homemade catheter.
Do you know, I just listen and learn.
You know how long it takes to get to the good spot in the mosh pit?
Anyway, I spoke to him about a year after the rally ended, and he said that going on a trip like this made him realize what he wanted out of life, and it was something very different from most of his friends back home.
They have different life goals, like I'm only just turned 26, and I have a lot of friends that are settling in, buying houses, having kids, and some of them have been doing it for 2 years now. They're doing parental things, and I feel like I've got a different interest than what they do. I'm not particularly interested in owning things or nothing that I can't take with me at the end of the day. Whatever I can fit in my backpack and just some memories.
I also discussed the lasting impact of this journey with Jane and Rosie shortly before we got to the finish line, and Jane in particular saw it as a milestone.
I think whenever you have anything major happen in your life, which is, I don't know, like death, divorce, the Mongol Rally. Seriously, it is up there. It is up there. But it makes you reevaluate your life and what you do with your life and,
It's like that
what
lady
you
I
do
told
going
you about.
forward.
Rosie jumped in.
The lady I met who first told me about the Mongol Rally, she told me she'd done it with her daughter, and when she got back, she thought, if I can do that and survive that, I can do anything. And she left a very bad marriage, which she'd been in for years. She says she would never have left. She would have stayed in a bad marriage, but it gave her the courage to do it.
So how do you think this might change you?
Oh God, I hope it doesn't.
I'm not saying about your marriage.
No, I was going to say I'm very happily married. I am extremely happily married. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be life-changing. I think I need time to process and to evaluate and to think about it.
What do you think, Jane?
Oh, it's changed me massively.
How?
I appreciate home more, definitely. I appreciate Tim more, massively.
Tim, you'll recall, was Jane's partner back in the UK who helped us contact the embassy when we were stranded in Mongolia.
That absence makes the heart grow fonder, which I always thought was a load of baloney. I mean, I've been away from home on, occasions, but never for this period of time. But I think it just makes you realise how fortunate you are to be where you are and what you have, the very privileged position that you're in, and it's made me appreciate things a lot more. It's even made me happy about paying road tax at home. I kid you not. Your road tax is worth every penny.
Jane also said she hopes to do more charity work in the future. The other big way this whole experience impacted many of us was that it changed our perception of the world.
It's like really, really easy to think of people in other countries as like distant and strange and exotic. And like, don't get me wrong, like those places and those cultures are, but it was really exciting to see people just be people.
That's Joe Rittenhouse again.
I may be making an accusation here, and I don't mean to be, but it felt like the whole world was a little bit more Western than I thought in certain areas. Like they had a lot of things that we had, enjoyed the same movies and things, and I thought that was really neat. It made me a lot less scared of the world in general.
Ah, yes, fear. If you've been listening since the beginning of this series, you'll remember that was a major theme in many of my early episodes. There was a fear about entering Turkey 6 days after an attempted coup, our father's fear of us being Americans driving across Iran, and our uncertainty about our journey along the Pamir Highway just across the river from Afghanistan, which of course doesn't exactly have the reputation of being the safest country in the world. Many of our fellow travelers also had to deal with these sorts of concerns from worried friends and family members. In fact, we heard about one instance where a team member's girlfriend was so afraid that she allegedly stole the passports of him and his buddies to prevent them from taking part in the rally. Undeterred, they obtained replacements at the last minute and managed to proceed with their plans, albeit delayed by a few weeks because of the setback. Joe told me about the conversations he and his girlfriend Alyssa had with their nervous relatives.
My parents were like, this is stupid. This is dumb. Alyssa's family was much more open, I think, because, you know, she's their youngest daughter, and this is the first time she's been out abroad. And then, like, after we were on the road, my parents, like, did a 180. They were very excited. They would share everything on social media. I think just the initial shock to them that I would want to go to some of these places or, like, see these kinds of things is what really scared them. But then, you know, it sounds dumb, but when you come back alive from a trip like that, I think it changes them even too, because now my parents and my sisters are looking into doing more trips abroad, you know, just because I did it. So I think when you get over that fear, it opens the door to a lot of possibilities.
I think for me and my brother, our father in particular was really nervous about us going to Iran and Turkey and some of these places. And I kept trying to tell him all along that, you know, we've researched this thoroughly. This event's been going on over a decade. You know, it's not as scary as you think it is. Yeah. And for me, you know, obviously I wanted to be safe and I didn't want to have any problems. But a large part of it also was that I wanted to kind of prove to him and our other family members that the world isn't such a big, bad, scary place like they thought it was.
It's not.
Yeah, well, that's why I feel great now, having come back alive and not even had any scary stories to tell. You know, I've said there was never an instance where we really felt scared or in danger or anything. So I feel vindicated, and that was really important for me because that was the worldview I had going into it, and I feel even more so reinforced now.
Yeah, like I never once thought I couldn't get out of a situation. I never like laid down and said, well, this is it. This is where I'm at. You know, this is just what the world has handed to me. At the end of the day, most of the fear that I had instantly went out the door after being in said country for, you know, a day or two. Like, I was told I would hate Kazakhstan. I was told, oh, the cops are corrupt, you're going to lose all this money, yada, yada, yada. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. You know, it just goes to show you that, like, it's all anecdotal, I know, but you can't knock it till you try it.
I think that's what struck me the most, that there was such a big chasm between your perceptions and then what the reality is actually on the ground.
Yeah.
You know, you have all these fears and worries and concerns from several thousand miles away from the other side of the earth. You're reading about things, hearing about things, but then you actually go there and it's not at all what you had heard or expected or thought. You know, it's totally different, which I found really interesting. I think that's my biggest takeaway, that wherever you go in the world, despite governments and politics and everything, average everyday people are generally good. And I mean, I think I already had faith in humanity, but it made it even more so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I also think that really helped me was when we were in these places and people would just come up to us and be like, thank you for coming to our country to see us, like, come eat with my family. We got invited to so many people's houses. We went, like, ate with random people. They would give us food everywhere. And to me, I was kind of blown away because, like, in certain places like this, they don't have much, but they would just so openly and lovingly just be like, I want to share with you. I was kind of taken aback by how welcoming the people who had nothing were. There was a perfect example when we were driving someplace and we had to find a place to stay, and a farmer's like, well, you can sleep in my yard. Could you imagine, you live in New York, right?
New Jersey, yeah.
New Jersey,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if somebody just walked up, knocked on your door, and like, hello, we're travelers from, Swaziland. We're looking for a place to stay. Do you mind if we crash our tiny little car outside your house and sleep on your couch? Like, you would slam the door in their face. But the amount of people were just like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, they were so excited, and they would bring out their best food, and their whole family would come to talk to you. It made me want to do that for people who come to see America.
It's interesting because it seems like there's two kind of different views of the world that people tend to have. And I don't know if a lot of times it's broken down by conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, or whatever. But there's the one point of view that, a lot of people who, understandably, if they haven't traveled a lot or they've always lived their whole lives in their hometown or whatever, they don't have passports, and people view the world as kind of a big, scary place.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is fueled by, if their only understanding or knowledge of the world is just what they see on television or read in the paper or whatever. I mean, they don't have any firsthand experience. And then there's, I think, a point of view it's shaped by people who've actually been to places, had these firsthand experiences, and can say, well, it's not at all what you think it might be like. I've met people, I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, me and Alyssa were this way. Like, Alyssa's never been anywhere, and I've been to a few places, but I've never been anywhere like substantial. And Alyssa's actually never lived anywhere outside of her hometown, and she's a very to herself kind of person, but she wanted to like explore the world. And we both came to the conclusion we wanted to do this together. And like, she's the liberal, I'm the conservative, and we're an odd pair, but I like really sympathize with the Mark Twain attitude of like, I don't know what the quote is exactly, but he basically says, the more you travel and the more you see, the more you just become a learned man and like see the world and understand other people and things. And I've always kind of really admired that. I feel bad for people who feel like they're stuck, because I think a lot of my friends don't agree on a lot of things, but one of the things that I always find interesting is when I say I went off and did this, they're just like, wow, I could never do that. And I'm like, but why not? You know what I mean? I feel like the biggest fear people have is just stepping outside that zone of comfort, whether it be I just don't want to leave where I'm from, or whether it's I'm scared of the outside world, or, oh, I don't have enough money to make it happen. It all comes down to just fear. And I think that's the last thing you need when you're trying to like make a better world, is to just be scared of people.
So has your trip, your experiences, has that influenced in any way, like your worldview, your politics, anything like that, do you think?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, I was pretty anti-Iran before I went to Iran, and now I see the people as much more American and Western than I do in some places like Saudi Arabia or even places like Turkey. I never would have found myself thinking that had I not gone there. I definitely used to have a more diplomatic approach to like foreign policy on things. Like, I would always be like, oh, we shouldn't talk to these people because they're a terrorist regime or this, that, or the other thing. And now I'm like, I don't see the problem in just talking to people. And that's something that has like significantly changed. I feel like if worse comes to worse, like, people are not their governments. And I feel like it's just totally worth the United States to just be a little bit more talkative. So the rally changed me in that way.
So you think the world would be a better place if more people got to travel and go to these places and meet people firsthand? Yeah,
absolutely. Travel is the only way I see going forward.
Rosie can attest to that. She told me she'd barely gotten home when she started thinking about her next trip.
I honestly thought that I would get back here and I would feel really grounded and connected and want to nest for, the foreseeable future. But you know what? It took me about a month and then I got itchy feet again. I was actually desperate to be on the road. I walk the dogs at the beach a lot of the time, particularly first thing in the morning. This is how pathetic I am. There's a stretch of road between me and the beach, which I deliberately take now. I don't have to go that way, but I choose to because it's unmade. and it's very bumpy and there are potholes. It's a very narrow part of the road and it's very windy, very twisty, and I love going down it because it reminds me of being on the road. And the only thing is I'm in an automatic four-wheel drive rather than in a noddy car with manual, but that kilometre or two just gives me a bit of a buzz going down there.
Since getting back, Joe also said he'd developed a new sense of wanderlust. So are you planning your next trip?
Yes, I am. The adventurers have that one sailing adventure off the coast of Tanzania. I kind of want to give that a try. I'm also looking into going to a place like, it sounds crazy, but I'm looking to go to a place like North Korea. I just kind of want to see something that, other people aren't going to see.
Before you set out in this rally, did you ever imagine you would be considering a trip to North Korea?
Absolutely not. Never a day in my life. If you had asked me like 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, do you want to get in a tiny car and drive around the world in third world countries and war zones and, through places no one else has ever seen, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I'm going to college and getting my degree and I'm going to do all this other stuff. I don't have time for nonsense. And now I really don't know why I would ever try and see the world any other way.
After speaking with Joe, I looked up that Mark Twain quotation he couldn't exactly remember, and it turns out it's from the book Innocents Abroad, where Twain documented his journey on a steamer ship around the Mediterranean in 1867. He wrote that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, and charitable views of men and things, he said, cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. You'll recall Joe mentioned that after returning from the rally, he decided to quit his job at the restaurant. He now has a job he finds much more rewarding and meaningful, working for a company that helps travelers secure difficult visas to go on adventures just like he did. Finally, Joe's hope to visit North Korea is now on hold after the U.S. government forbade its citizens from traveling there following the detention and death of American college student Otto Warmbier. But Joe says he'd still like to go someday. And if he could figure out how to be safe, he told me in an email recently that he'd also like to go to Caracas, Venezuela, and Damascus, Syria. Visit the show website at farfromhomepodcast.org to see a map of our route on the Mongol Rally compared with the routes of all the other teams. I've also posted a short video of highlights from our journey, which I think all of you will like, so definitely check that out. This wraps up Season 1 of Far From Home. If you know anyone else who might enjoy this podcast, please spread the word and let them know, because all 24 or so episodes are now out there, and I've heard from some of you that they're highly bingeable. And as I said last time, don't worry, because there's a whole new season coming out beginning this summer. I'm going to take a bit of a break over the next couple of months to work on producing more shows, but definitely stay subscribed to this podcast and watch for more content beginning in July. I've got some great stories I'm working on from all over the world that I think you'll really like. In the meantime, remember you can follow Far From Home on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter to stay up to date on everything and see what I'm up to. And as I say at the end of each show, I want to thank the Public Radio Exchange for their behind-the-scenes technical help. Big shout-out as always to Katie McGee and my brother Drew Gurian for their editorial assistance with this episode. And finally, thanks to Jane, Drew, and Rosie for putting up with my audio paparazzi tactics, constantly sticking a microphone in their faces when they least expected it.
What do you want? What? I need to document.
We know what you're doing.
Yes. This is an important milestone I need to record.
I know what, I'll just use lots of expletives and then you'll have to cut me out.
It's a podcast. I could use whatever I want.
Yeah. What, all my expletives in your podcast? You're going to tell me I'm terribly English again now for using that word.